before we get started, let me just maybe share with you a bit more about the Zoom platform and how you can engage with us during the webinar. We have a very exciting webinar today about a new release on enumerator management. Max will be the host today, we encourage you to engage and ask us as many questions. We will be ready to address any doubts or questions you might have around this. You can use the chat window to engage with us, but for questions, please use the Q&A feature of Zoom. You can find this in the Zoom menu. If you are using the Zoom desktop app, you will see that in the menu in the bottom. So please post your questions in the Q&A icon and we will address all the questions at the end of the webinar. Max will reply to your questions, and I will also keep an eye out on the chat if you have more general SurveyCTO questions that you would like to learn. Hello, Solomon. Okay, so I think we are just in time. I see that a lot of people is already here, so I will hand off to Max. And welcome. Please go ahead, Max.
Hi, everyone. My name is Max, the Technical Support Associate at Doability, the makers of SurveyCTO. We recently released new functionality in SurveyCTO that allows you to easily manage and monitor your enumerators. In this webinar, we will discuss in detail the purposes of this functionality, how to use it, and how to set it up. We'll start by talking about what enumerators are and why it is important to manage them. We will then show how easy it is for enumerators to use enumerator functionality using SurveyCTO Collect. Finally, we will talk about how you can set up enumerator functionality in your own forms so you can more easily manage your enumerators. Let's start by briefly going over what we mean by enumerators, why it is important to manage them, and how the new enumerator functionality can help you achieve that goal. Enumerators are responsible for collecting your data. They can either talk to respondents in person, call them on the phone, or whatever works best for your own workflow. Enumerators will use SurveyCTO Collect or web forms to collect your data. It can be important to record which enumerators completed which submissions. This can really help when reviewing data, so you can see if certain enumerators have more issues in their forms than others. Maybe when reviewing a sample of audio audits, one enumerator's interviews tend to be inaccurate or non-existent, which may mean that you have to drop the submissions completed by that enumerator. Maybe you simply want to make sure the enumerator interviewed the respondents they were supposed to interview, or see how many interviews they completed compared to their colleagues. For these and countless other reasons, it is a good idea to track which enumerator completed which submissions. There are lots of ways to track enumerators using SurveyCTO. You could have a select one field where enumerators select themselves from a list, which is fine if you just have a few enumerators, but it can be annoying to find yourself in a list of dozens or even hundreds of different enumerators. There could be a text field where enumerators enter their ID, but again, this can be annoying to do each time. You could have a different login credential with a different username for each enumerator, but it can be difficult to manage so many different usernames and passwords. The enumerator functionality is much easier and more efficient way to manage your enumerators. There's a field type called the enumerator field type that you can add to your forms. When enumerators reach this field, they will start by selecting themselves from a list, similar to a select one field. But then, the next time they come across that field, instead of needing to select themselves again, the field will remember them and it will simply ask them to confirm their name, as shown in this screenshot on the right. That way, enumerators don't have to select themselves every time, nor enter an ID every time. The enumerator field can also be used to add new enumerators. When an enumerator goes to initially select themselves from a list, there will be a button they can tap to add themselves to the list of enumerators without any intervention needed from a manager. The enumerator functionality has all sorts of benefits. It can make it much easier to manage long lists of enumerators, use the same list of enumerators across multiple projects, prevent the need to manage dozens or even hundreds of credentials, and save time and effort for the enumerators by having SurveyCTO Collect remember them each time they fill out the form. For these reasons and more, SurveyCTO's enumerator functionality can greatly facilitate the tracking and management of enumerators. Let's take a look at how enumerator functionality looks from the enumerator perspective and how easy it is to use. When an enumerator first comes across an enumerator field, all they have to do is select themselves and they are all set. Let's see this in practice. Here is an emulator of an Android device running SurveyCTO Collect. I'll go ahead and tap Fill Blank Form and select a form. The first field in the form is an enumerator field. As you can see, all I have to do is select a name, swipe forward, and we're all set. I'll go ahead and complete this form. Now I'll open a different form. As you can see, even though this is a different form, I don't have to find and select the enumerator again. The field remembers what I selected earlier and asks to confirm if they are that enumerator. That way, enumerators don't have to find themselves in the list each time. However, if for some reason they do need to select a different enumerator, they can simply tap No and select someone else. Generally, the most common way to select an enumerator is to select their name from a list, similar to a Select One field. This is called list mode. Enumerators can also use entry mode, where instead of selecting the name from a list, they can use their enumerator ID. They can also use scan mode. With scan mode, you provide enumerators with a barcode or QR code containing their enumerator ID, and all they have to do is scan that code, and they will be automatically selected. In all three modes, the selected enumerator will be remembered, so they only have to select their name, enter an ID, or scan a QR code the first time they fill out a form with an enumerator field, and every time after that, they will be already selected. Also, as discussed earlier, if the enumerator is not already in the list of enumerators, they can use the Add New Enumerator button to add themselves to the list. You can even restrict this with a code, so only authorized enumerators with that code will be able to add themselves. As you can see, there are several ways for enumerators to select themselves, which they can use with ease, making it easy to track which enumerators completed which forms. We've already discussed how the enumerator functionality works on the enumerator end. Now, let's talk about how to actually set it up. The enumerator functionality requires two parts, an enumerator dataset and an enumerator field in your form. Let's go over both of these. You will manage your list of enumerators using an enumerator dataset, a special kind of server dataset. Just like a normal server dataset, you will add it from the Design tab of your server console using a plus on the left. If you have never used a server dataset before, check out our quick start guide on managing enumerators, which will walk you through how to add an enumerator dataset step by step. In an enumerator dataset, each row will be for a different enumerator. On the right, we have a sample enumerator dataset. As you can see, there are 4 enumerators: Adnan, Bhavna, Charles, and Dana. When an enumerator reaches an enumerator field in a form, they will see this list of names, and they will be able to select their name from the list. An enumerator dataset has 3 properties, the first 2 of which are required. The ID is the unique identifier of the enumerator, and the name is the friendly name of the enumerator, usually their real name. The third property, users, is optional. It contains a list of usernames who will be able to view that enumerator. Let's take a look at an example. Let's say there are 2 projects, Project 1 and Project 2, and each project will have different enumerators. You can create 2 usernames, Project 1 and Project 2. Then use the users property of the enumerator dataset to assign those usernames, Project 1 and Project 2, to different enumerators. In this enumerator dataset, the enumerator Charles has a users property of Project 1, so that enumerator will only be seen by users who are signed in as the username Project 1. Meanwhile, the enumerator Dana has a users property of Project 2, so that enumerator will only be seen by users who are signed in as the username project2. In this first screenshot of Collect you see on screen, the user is signed in as the username project1, so they can only see the usernames Adnan, Bhavna, and Charles, but not Dana. In the second screenshot, the user is signed in as the username project2, so they can see the usernames Adnan, Bhavna, and Dana, but not Charles. In the third screenshot, they're signed in as enumerator1, which is not listed in the users column at all. They can only view the enumerators that have no users property, which are Adnan and Bhavna. By using the users property, the view will be much simpler with fewer enumerators, so it will be easier for data collectors to find their name. While not too helpful in a list of just 4 enumerators, when you have dozens or even hundreds of enumerators, the users property can make this process much smoother and easier. There is also the option to view other enumerators, which will show a list of all enumerators regardless of their user's value. Like the Add New Enumerators button, this can be restricted with a code, so only authorized users will be able to see a list of all enumerators. To use an enumerator dataset with a form with an enumerator field, simply attach it to that form like you would any other server dataset. When you attach an enumerator dataset to a form, it will also automatically set up dataset publishing. Earlier, we talked about the Add New Enumerator button and enumerator field, where if an enumerator does not see themselves in the list, they can add themselves with ease. When that form is submitted to the server, that new enumerator will then be automatically added to the enumerator dataset. That way, the enumerator dataset will always be up to date with a list of all enumerators who have submitted forms. In addition to dataset publishing, you can also add new enumerators by uploading a data file, such as a CSV or spreadsheet file, or by manually editing the enumerator dataset, just like a normal survey dataset. You can also have multiple enumerator datasets. Each enumerator dataset can have its own list of enumerators, though they can also share enumerators. You can attach up to 1 enumerator dataset to each form. Let's demonstrate how to create an enumerator dataset. Here is the Design tab of the Server console. I'll click a plus on the left, and then Add Server Dataset. Then, New Dataset for Enumerators. I'll call this Enumerators B. For Add Some Enumerators Now, I'll select Yes. So it adds some example enumerators, but this is optional. Then I'll scroll to the bottom and click Create Dataset. And we're all set. We now have an enumerator dataset. If I click Edit, you can see the data in this enumerator dataset. As you can see, we have all 3 enumerator properties: ID, name, and users. The users property is optional, so it is fine that those values are blank. I'll click Edit to close this. Let's attach this to a form. I'll click Attach, then select the form Midline Form. I'll click Close, and we're all set. As you can see, by attaching the form, it automatically added dataset publishing. So when a new enumerator is added using the midline form, that enumerator will also be added to the enumerator dataset. As you can see, adding an enumerator dataset takes less than a minute, and it is easy to attach it to forms. Once you have an enumerator dataset, you can start using it in a form. To use the enumerator functionality in a form, you only have to do 2 things: add an enumerator field to your form, and then attach an enumerator dataset to your form, and you're all set. Let's demonstrate this using the online form designer. Click a plus on the left and give the field a label. And in the list of field types, select Enumerator. Then click Configure. Give the field a name. I'll simply call this field Enumerator. Then select the enumerator dataset you would like to attach to this form. I'll select the enumerator dataset we created earlier, enumerators B, which will then be attached to this form. When you're ready, click Save Now. A pop-up will then appear asking if you'd like to add calculate fields that retrieve the name and ID of the enumerator, which can be helpful during data analysis. While not required, we recommend clicking Yes. And we're all set. An enumerator field has been added to our form, as well as fields that retrieve the name and ID of the enumerator. You can also add an enumerator field using a spreadsheet form definition. Just be sure to attach your enumerator dataset to your form once you deploy it. There are lots of ways you can customize the enumerator field. You can restrict adding new enumerators with a code, change which entry mode appears by default, and more. You can also add calculate fields with functions that retrieve information about the selected enumerator. Check out the documentation to learn more, which we'll share soon.